Hi, my name is Abby Blum, and today I will be talking about the relationship between the way children tell their life stories and the big five personality traits. In order to understand this more, we need to understand a little bit more about life stories and personality in general. In McAdams' three-level model of personality, there are three layers which work together to develop a cohesive personality. At the first level, we have traits. This is the most basic level, and these are observable characteristics that each individual has. When we talk about traits, we are often talking about the big five personality traits. These are commonly used measures of personality, which include conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. And we use these because it is a very commonly used normative model of personality traits. In the second level, we have goals. And goals are motives, and they incorporate your traits. For example, a goal would be to be a good mother. And finally, we have narratives as the most complex layer. These are uniquely personal stories, and they're often referred to as life stories. So what is a life story exactly? A life story is the way an individual constructs all the events, the obstacles, and the relationships they've experienced into a narrative. This takes into account the past and the present, and it is a strong predictor of identity because it reflects the way an individual interprets an event. However, researchers don't often examine the associations between the different levels of personality. So in this study, I'm interested to see if we see associations between the first and the third level. For example, would someone who's rated more extroverted as a trait explain themselves more in terms of their relationships with others for their life story? This is important to study because people's lives are shaped by the various events, obstacles, and relationships they experience, and the way they interpret those events makes them uniquely personal. Additionally, someone's personality makes them uniquely personal, so it's important to see if there's an association between them that leads to a stronger identity. One way to measure coherence one way to measure life stories is to measure coherence. So what is coherence? Its definition is a combination of a story's clarity on a linear timeline and thematic importance. I know that might sound a little bit confusing now, but I'll explain it more with some examples. Overall, the more coherent an individual is, the better they are at explaining when an event occurred, how it occurred, and why it was important. Their ability to make sense of this reflects their ability to make sense of their own identities. We split this coherence into three dimensions: context, chronology, and theme. Context is when and where something happened. For example, it happened in Florida in 2011. That's context. Chronology is a linear timeline, so you can follow the events, as in this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and you can follow along with the story. And finally, we have theme. And theme is the development of the story, the explaining of why it was important, what it means to someone. Perhaps they elaborate on the emotions they felt. Overall, people think that adults tell fully developed coherent stories, but we know that this begins to develop in kids, so we wanted to see if kids could be able to tell coherent stories. Overall, researchers have found that more coherent personal narratives are better related to better memory and communication and overall stronger senses of identity. So it's important to study this during the phase of identity development. For our particular study, we used the narrative coherence coding scheme. This is a coding scheme that in previous studies has been shown to work well with children. Here's a simple version of the coding scheme, and this has been used to show this has been used to measure coherence in children's narratives. So I'm going to give you an example of someone who would get threes across the board. So for context, they would say, "Hi, I went to Disney World with my family in the summer of 2015, and it was a great family vacation." And for chronology, they would say, "First we went to the park, and then we got something to eat, and then we went to the hotel, and then we went to sleep," because you can clearly follow the events of the day. And finally, for theme, this would be sort of the development of the topic. So they would be on topic. They'd substantially develop the topic, as in giving emotional stories about it. Perhaps they would say, "This trip was really fun for me because my family doesn't often go on vacations. It was really exciting to see after all the hard work we put into making money to go on the vacation, we were able to, and I got to bond with my family and spend time." And these threes often end with a resolution where the child explains how this experience affects them now in the present. So for the present study, Our goal was to determine the relationship between coherence and the big five personality traits via children's best and sad memories. Our participants were 367 children aged 9 to 14, taken from a pre-existing community dataset sample from Toronto, Canada. For our measures, we used the Inventory of Children's Individual Differences, the ISID, and the Big Five Inventory, or the BFI. These are parent-reported ratings of personality traits. And finally, we had children's best and sad memories, and we rated those for coherence. There was a team of 4 coders, and we made sure we were reliable with one another before rating all of these memories. For the data analyses, we performed regression analyses between coherence ratings and the big five personality traits. First of all, before we looked at coherence and how it relates to personality traits, we just wanted to see if coherence scores would even be variable in a population this young. Would the children be able to tell coherent narratives? The answer is yes. Most research on how people tell life stories has not focused on an age group this young, so it was really exciting to see that we have some variability in coherence ratings even in this early of a sample. And this is important because the ability to tell coherent life narratives is lower in childhood and early adolescence, but since there are variation in these children's levels of coherence, this suggests that the process of autobiographical reasoning and consequently identity development begins in childhood. Next, we wanted to see whether best memory coherence and personality traits were associated. If you look at the axis, it only goes up to 0.25. So while there were some significant associations, they were weak and few in number. You can see that neuroticism, BFI extroversion, and ISID openness were significantly associated with best memory coherence. However, when we looked at sad memory coherence and personality traits, there were no significant associations. When we were wondering why this was, we thought that perhaps children, compared to adults, are able to conjure their good memories easier than their sad memories, because sad memories may require deeper thought. Another hypothesis was that children often spoke, when we were going through the coding, we noticed that children often spoke of their best memories in terms of something they had accomplished, whether that be joining a sports team or winning a prize. And their sad memories were often discussing the loss of a family member or describing an event in which they had no agency. So perhaps when they made their best memories, these included more self-defining memories, as in those that were personally significant and led to the individual better understanding their self or their sense of identity, and therefore they gave more details compared to the sad memories. However, it is important to note that this was just a qualitative review of the data and was not an official quantitative or empirical study, so the difference between best and sad memories would be studied further in further detail for future studies. Finally, to discuss all of this, we found that coherence and personality traits were largely unassociated. Under this model, this would be expected because if you remember McAdams' 3-level model, traits, goals, and narratives, they are 3 distinct levels. If there were high associations between all 3 of those levels, then we would assume that personality could be better conceptualized as one single layer. However, having the lack of associations between the different layers provides support for the distinction between the 3 levels of personality. However, we did find some significant associations between best memory coherence and openness, neuroticism, and extroversion. These effect sizes, although small, show that overall children who were more coherent were rated higher in these traits by their parents. And these results concur with previous studies. To look into openness a little bit more, the scale of openness in the big 5 personality traits often includes openness to experience and intellect. So essentially, openness is an overarching trait that is comprised of smaller traits such as imagination or interest in art. And these traits have been found to be associated with intelligence. So perhaps children higher in intellect were better able to organize their memories for the given tasks. Overall, why is this important to study? It's because the results provide insight into the development of coherence and its relationship to personality traits before adulthood. Understanding how coherence functions in a younger population, how it relates to personality traits, will lead to a better understanding of the overall progression of identity formation in children. So thank you so much for listening to my study. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.